up, and their impasse was about his retirement account or his pension. And what I brought up to them was, is there anything you need to revisit from your past, from your marriage, that might require an apology? And do you think it would be helpful to say it right now? And the husband turned to the wife, tears rolling down his cheeks, and he never specified what he was sorry for. And I, of course, didn't ask, but she knew. And he said, I cannot tell you how difficult our divorce has been because I've been too stubborn to say I'm sorry. And then he apologized, and guess what? 10 minutes later, his pension deal was resolved because he said the apology and she accepted the apology.
Welcome to the Divorce Discussions Podcast, where professionals share practical guidance to help you move through divorce with clarity and confidence. Let's get into the discussion. Does divorce always mean having to find a lawyer and battling it out in court for years? Absolutely not. At the Divorce Support Collective, we are passionate about sharing empowering education so people navigating this journey know all of their options. And today, this episode of Divorce Discussions, we're going to be sharing an option that you might just want to look into and might be the right fit: mediation. Now, I'm your host, Angie Weber. I'm the director of the Divorce Support Collective, and I'm so honored to introduce you to one of our fabulous, amazing members, Nancy Gabriel. Nancy is a divorce and family mediator and owner of Mediation Around the Table. She's passionate about helping people end their relationship with dignity and respect, and to encourage collaborative co-parenting. Her personal style is one of compassion, empathy, and accessibility, never losing sight of how difficult situations can become. She likes to encourage her clients to put away their rearview mirrors and move forward with their next chapter in peace and with joy. She's going to share some of those insights with you today, so buckle up, and thank you so much, Nancy, for being with me today.
Thank you, Angie. What a beautiful introduction. I'm honored to be responding to those lovely words. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm honored for you to be on because you're such a wealth of knowledge. You've been doing and practicing mediation for some years now, so I know you're going to be able to give our listeners some absolute amazing insight. But I think the first place we should really start with, because again, maybe it's what we've seen in movies or on TV, or the horror story that we heard from the neighbor down the street about how divorces take years and it's just about finding the best lawyer to make it through it. A lot of people don't understand what is the difference of mediation versus litigation.
Well, there's a lot of differences, but the main difference is in mediation, the parties are the decision makers. All I do as the neutral third party is facilitate the conversation. In litigation, you not only run the risk of spending tens of thousands of dollars and taking years, but you also run the risk of a judge deciding what's best for your family when a judge doesn't know your family. So wouldn't it make more sense for you to be the decision makers as participants in a mediation?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard that so much from people too. And of course, amazing professionals like yourself, that they say, I don't want the person sitting in the black robe up there being the one making the decisions when they just see us, for a little bit of time, but we really understand what's going on in our family. Now, I know I'm here in Minnesota, you're in Nevada, and I know that part of the divorce process here in Minnesota is that you are obligated to go to mediation at least one time, but people really see that, from what I've heard from people who have experienced it, that it's kind of one of those check boxes.
Yes.
Well, we'll just go to mediation because we have to, but then we're going to go back into court. So what can you share about mediation to kind of change that perspective of it's not just something you should check off, but you should really look into it as an option for your divorce?
Well, that's a really good point about court-ordered mediation. It happens in Nevada as well because, well, only when there's a custody issue involved. But if a mediator steps in before they ever get into court, first of all, I'm going to bash lawyers for one more second. Indulge me, please. They have their place. My entire family are lawyers and judges and paralegals, and I was a paralegal for many years. I've been in private divorce mediation practice for more than 14 years. I just started my 15th. And what I've seen with lawyers in this arena is they tend to stir a pot that doesn't need to be stirred. And particularly if the husband's lawyer and the wife's lawyer have had a past history with each other, they want to posture with each other to prove who's smarter. And guess who pays for that? The clients. And so I like to get my clients away from that. It's not always an option. And what I like to say is if you are the kind of person who needs to be right, then mediation won't be a good fit for you. But if you are the kind of person who wants to co-parent forever, because guess what? Even though you're no longer a couple, you're always going to be a family. So if you want to co-parent together and put your kids first, mediation is certainly a good starting place. And if you come to me with 5 issues and we can resolve 4 in mediation, instead of 5, which is rare. Usually we're 5 out of 5. But if you have an issue that is unsolvable in mediation because neither of you is willing to move, then you roll the dice, excuse the Vegas metaphor, and let a judge decide.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify again for people who are listening, whether they've heard of mediation before or maybe they're like, oh, I didn't even know this was an option. You can still use a lawyer throughout mediation, or there can be involvement of a lawyer as well.
100%. In fact, I just answered an email over the weekend. A client asked me that very same thing. We're just about to get started. Should I have my lawyer sit in on the mediations? And I said, your lawyer is welcome. Always welcome. I have nothing against that except you're paying twice as much.
Yeah.
And do you really need a lawyer to sit in when you're deciding who's going to keep which car, or what you're going to do about spending Christmas with your children? So instead, what I suggest is that, because what I do is I draft a settlement agreement. So what I suggest is before anybody signs that settlement agreement that I drafted based on the deals that you made in my office, that you have a lawyer look it over. And then once that lawyer's looked it over and made whatever changes they want, and I incorporate those changes in, then you can sign it. It makes more sense to pay a lawyer at the end of the process, but before you sign on the dotted line.
I think that's great advice and insight. I want to go back a little bit more of helping people who are listening to this decide, is mediation the right point for me, or is it the right option? Because as you said, if you are someone who just wants to be right no matter what, and you want to fight tooth and nail, mediation probably not going to be the best route. However, what are some other ways that people could think or really decide if mediation is the right choice?
Well, the first thing is to give it a try. Stick your toes in the water. If it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. And like I said, maybe we can get the parenting aspect of your divorce finalized, and then you go see a lawyer about the financial portion of your divorce, or vice versa. But I think it's almost always a good starting point. And at least you can get a feel for what Nevada law is. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm prohibited from giving legal advice, but I know the law. And you can at least figure out where your questions lie versus where you're on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because a lot of people, and this is what I've heard from people who have used mediators as well, is that it can be a more affordable option. And of course, when we think of lawyers, there's usually big dollar signs that pop up in our head. And I love how you already pointed out, like, is it really like, yes, your lawyer is welcome to be in this meeting with us, but is it really beneficial to you in the long run for them to be, sitting there while we talk about who's getting what car when we already made an agreement? Right. And so there is this conception that, yes, it is a more affordable option, but something at the Divorce Support Collective that we really strive to do too is we love gathering together professionals who are really seeking to reimagine the process of divorce through collaboration and support. That's our whole mission statement. And that means that we have multiple different professionals who can come alongside you and be kind of like your A-team, because you handle the mediation really well. I know you can do some stuff with the co-parenting and the emotional support, but for example, the financial stuff, maybe we want to bring in someone who's more of an expert in that, and maybe a divorce coach is going to be really beneficial. So I guess really the long way of asking this is, besides the financial piece, what are some of the long-term benefits you see for families, maybe emotionally or in other areas, that mediation can provide?
Well, I can speak to what I can provide. I can't speak for all mediators,
Yeah.
obviously. But one thing that comes to mind is I put a provision in the settlement agreement that the parents, the co-parents, agree to meet with each other once a year or twice a year, their call, to reevaluate the parenting plan. Because a parenting plan designed for a 3 and 5-year-old is not going to fit a 10 and 12-year-old or a 14 and 16-year-old. So I like to build in that flexibility, and it also gives my clients some peace of mind to know that they're not signing something in concrete that they've got to stick to for 10 years.
Yeah. And I did appreciate how when we first started out and you were talking about co-parents, I like your or your vision of like you might not be together anymore, but you're still going to be a family, and families look so completely different, right? Like every
Right.
family is unique and different. And I say that as well in my parent coaching business that when I work with co-parents, it's really figuring out two different journeys that you're on. One, how do you be the parent you want to be when you have your kids? And two, how do you navigate this relationship with your co-parent? Because even though you're not in a romantic relationship anymore, you still have a relationship with them. And sometimes you need to look at that as more of like a business relationship in some
Yeah.
senses. And so tell me a little bit more or share with our listeners a little more about what the benefits are when you are working with co-parents as far as the impact for the children using mediation versus going down the route of being in court for years and years.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of benefits. And one of the things I like to say is I like to get the kids' input if
Mhm.
they're of a certain age. I am very firm in the fact that they are not the decision makers, but their voices should be heard.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of a blended family mediation that I did years ago, where the husband and wife were fairly newly married, and they each had 13-year-old daughters. And they constructed their custody agreement where they either had both girls or no girls.
Mm-hmm.
And when they had both girls, there was chaos. The mom and the dad had different parenting styles. The girls hated each other, and the parents were at their wits' end. So I brought them in with the girls in my conference room, and we talked about rules. And I said to the girls, what rules do you want to see? What rules do you not want to see? And I made them be a part of the deal. And in fact, I wrote on a legal pad what the rules were and had them in their words, and then had them sign it as though it was a binding legal contract. And you know what? That this was years ago, and I've never heard back from that family. So I'm assuming that it all worked out. But the point I want to make to you, Angie, is I like to listen to the kids. In Nevada, the governing ruling of family court judges is what's in the best interest of the children. And so that really sticks with me.
Yeah. What a powerful story because I too am a huge believer in kids want their voices to be heard just as much as we do as adults, and we should listen. Again, it doesn't mean that they get to make the decision about everything, but to gain that awareness and that insight so we can become curious as parents and co-parents can see a different side of it versus them being so stuck in this tunnel vision because as we already mentioned, divorce comes with a lot of emotions, and when it comes to parenting too, that can lead to some very reactive decisions during the process versus really taking a step back and thinking what is in the best interest of the child because we
Right.
have all of those emotions and maybe some resentment from the other
Right.
parents.
Right.
Of what we think we need or we're entitled to or what we think is right. And so that is such just a beautiful example of how bringing the kids into it can really create some clarity and reduce the stress for all
Mhm.
parties involved as well. Now, I know we already talked a little bit about like if you always want to be right, this is probably not the right choice for you. You're going to have to go down a different route. But what if we have a listener on here saying, you know, I do think mediation would be right for us, and I would like to try stay out of the court so that we can make the decisions. But am I just going to get pretty much like bulldozed by my other party who maybe is a little bit more vocal and a little bit more strong-willed?
Yeah, that happens. That happens all the time. But my training and my experience and my expertise is to diminish that. And so I will say at the beginning, you're each going to have a voice. Please don't interrupt the other person, but I get to interrupt either of you. So if I see a bully, and believe me, I see bullies, I nip it in the bud. And sometimes what happens in mediation, sometimes they call this shuttle mediation. I'll ask one of the parties to go sit in the lobby for a few minutes so I can speak privately and confidentially to the other party, and then have them switch places. And that's an effective tool when we are at an impasse. I had a case years ago when the couple was pretty much on agreement with everything except for who was going to claim their child as a dependent on income tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the mom or the wife sit out in the lobby, and the husband was really dug in. And I turned to him and I said, look, what's it going to take? Do you want this to be over? Yes. Is this the hill you want to die on? And, sometimes I get forceful with them in terms of getting them to see where they're at versus where they could be, and without telling them what to do. And so that's a technique too, is to separate them and let the bully have a voice to me alone. And so once people feel that they've been heard, then they usually get off of their position and they're more in the spirit of compromise.
Yeah. Yeah, I just keep thinking of, all the different situations right now where you maybe have one person and they are, digging their heels in about the salt shakers. Let's just say something ridiculous, right? Like, I want the
Right.
salt shakers and you want them, and no, I'm going to get them. That's the hill that I'm going to die on.
Right.
And we know that it's not necessarily about the salt shakers. It's a
Exactly.
deeper meaning. It's something that's tied to that, or some kind of control that they're wanting to possess. But have you ever been in the situations in mediation where you are working with both of the parties, maybe even, meeting with them separately for a few minutes to get their voices heard, and they just still can't come to the agreement?
Yes. Not as often as you might think, because originally, people who come to mediation are already in the spirit of compromise.
Mm.
They want to get on with their lives. So it's not often that happens. But what I do as a mediator, if I see that they're at an impasse, is I try a baby step. Would you be willing to, you keep the salt shakers for 2 years, and then the other party keep the salt shakers for 2 years, and or 1 year or 6 months or whatever, and do a baby step. And then if that's not working, give me a call and we'll go to plan B.
Yeah.
So sometimes it takes the forever out of it if we do a baby step.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that's sometimes what we all need, right? When we want to make a change. And I talk about that with the parents that I support too, that it's taken us a lot of little steps to get to where we are, and it's going to take us a lot of little steps to get us to where we want to be.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it's not going to be as fast. But that brings up another really great question about mediation is and I know this can differ from case to case, but what is the expected timeline from someone coming in, a couple coming in and saying, hey, we want a divorce, we're going to start mediation? What's kind of the typical timeline of when their divorce can be finalized?
Well, Nevada is a peculiar state in that once a joint or uncontested petition gets filed with the court and attaches the settlement agreement that I prepare, they can get their final decree the next day.
Mm,
I had one case where the husband was a mixed martial fighter, whatever you call that,
sure.
MMA, and he was moving to Canada. Excuse me. And so they came to my office on a Monday. We mediated. They had one child. We mediated everything. I sent them the draft agreement on Tuesday. They had a couple minor changes. I made the changes. They came in on Wednesday and signed the agreement in front of my notary. Then they went straight to the paralegal who did the paperwork that gets filed with the court. He scans and attaches the settlement agreement to that paperwork. He electronically filed on Wednesday, and they were divorced on Thursday. So
Wow.
that's the quickest. Now, I've also had cases that take months and months and years. It just depends on them. Maybe not years and years, but months and
Sure.
months. And I've had people who've come back to me after their day in court
Mm.
And they still were at an impasse. The judge wasn't helpful, and each was into their attorneys for more than 40 grand. And this sort of leads me to something you didn't ask, Angie, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that is mediators are trained to listen to what people aren't saying as
Mm.
much as what they are saying. And what this particular couple who came back to me after their day in court, what I sort of heard but didn't hear was that the unsaid words were, "I'm sorry."
Mm.
And so I brought that up, and their impasse was about his retirement account or his pension. And what I brought up to them was, is there anything you need to revisit from your past, from your marriage that might require an apology? And do you think it would be helpful to say it right now? And the husband turned to the wife, tears rolling down his cheeks, and he never specified what he was sorry for. And I, of course, didn't ask, but she knew. And he said, "I cannot tell you how difficult our divorce has been because I've been too stubborn to say I'm sorry."
Mm.
And then he apologized. And guess what? 10 minutes later, his pension deal was resolved
Mm.
because he said the apology, and she accepted the apology in the spirit in which it was given, and then they were able to move forward. So that's something that a mediator learns through training and education and life experience on how to listen for what's not being said. So that one took, back to your original question, that one took over a year. But once it was done, it was done. And they felt good. I felt good. And I'll never forget this because it was right before Thanksgiving. And the wife sent me a beautiful email telling me what she was thankful for. And that made me cry.
Well, I was getting goosebumps when you were sharing that story because, I just threw out there an example of like the salt shakers, and we already said it's not usually about that. It's something deeper. And I love how, especially in your practice, again, we can't talk about all mediators, but for you, for example, it's that you're really looking at that communication piece, like what's being said, but also what's not being said. And we
Right.
know that communication and miscommunication is really the breaking point for a lot of people and can create a lot of tension and resentment, and typically is the thing that leads to divorce because
Right.
they don't know how to vocalize what they're trying to say. So that was a beautiful, again, example of how things can really, really turn out for the better using something like mediation by having that third party out there or involved, so that we can, make some of those correlations and you can both find a way to move forward, as you say, with peace and joy. And I love the thought that you say, like, let's leave the rearview mirror perspective out of this. Like, let's just keep moving forward of what do we want and how are we going to get there in the best way possible for all parties involved.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, you help people with these agreements, and they come in and they share what they want and what they don't want, and you help them come up with their agreements. But if there's someone listening saying, yep, you know what, I think mediation is the right, fit for us, is there any work that they should do before going into the mediator to make it more successful?
Well, that's sort of a slippery slope, Angie, because I have people that say, we're not ready to sit down with you because we haven't decided everything yet.
Mm.
And I have people who say, I have no idea what I want to do with the house or with the custody arrangement or anything like that. So my job is somewhere in between. But what I do initially is I send my clients worksheets on finance and on parenting before I sit down with them. And I emphatically tell them this is not homework. Don't print it out. Don't fill it out. They're talking points between the two of you,
Mm.
because the more you can decide together without my help, the more efficient the process will be. On the other hand, if you can't have a conversation with your spouse or soon to be ex, don't worry about it. I will help you through it. But these are the types of questions you can anticipate that I'm going to ask you.
I love that. I love that. So, not making people feel pressured to do a bunch of stuff beforehand. They don't have to have it all figured out because that's where you come in. And that's
Right.
why you're the expert. Now, Nancy, I know that you are our number one choice in Nevada. That's where we want to send everyone, is to you. However, for people who are outside of Nevada, if they're looking for a mediator, what would you say are a few questions or qualities that they should be looking for in a mediator to make sure that the process goes as smoothly as it can?
Well, to quote my dad, God gave us two ears and one mouth. So we should listen twice as much as we speak. So most importantly, I would look for a good listener. If you were interviewing a mediator, I would see who you connect with physically, emotionally, personally, because these people are going to help you get through undoubtedly the most difficult time in your life.
Yeah, I think we all need that advice regardless if we're looking for mediation or not, right? So it's kind of like go out and date a few mediators in a sense before deciding the one that you're going to commit to lead you on this journey. So
Exactly.
I think that's great advice. Now, as we're kind of wrapping up here, Nancy, you've shared such amazing information and insights. Other thing I wanted to ask you again for people who you've really piqued their interest and they're thinking, you know what, we know that we're headed for divorce. Maybe we're just in the very beginning, early stages, and I want to bring this up to my soon to be ex. Are there any good talking points that they can start this conversation with to really share the benefits of mediation with them?
Well, I personally offer a free initial consultation. So I tell people who have not approached this with their soon to be ex, I tell them four magic words, and they are, would you be willing?
Mm,
So ask your spouse, would you be willing to hop on an initial consultation, no charge, no pressure, see if you think this is a good fit for us?
yeah.
And that's, I think, magical. And then I just explain the process and they can see whether I listen, whether I talk too much, whether what I have to say is relatable to them. Oftentimes I see when I talk about the kids, then I say, look, I'm neutral as to the two of you, but your children have no advocate, and I am going to be their advocate. And I see the parents nodding, and that's always something that almost always something that they're looking for in a mediator. So I try to help that way. But yeah, I like your concept of dating a few. I think that's a great idea.
And I know that we've talked a lot about co-parenting and being the advocate for the children, but you also help people who have no children as well,
Yes,
correct? Just to clarify that. So,
yes. Or people who have adult children
mm,
that aren't under the jurisdiction of the court. I'm working with several couples right now that have been married in excess of 40 years.
mm,
And there's a term, I didn't coin it, but it's called the gray divorce, as in gray hair. And I'm seeing a lot of people who have raised their kids, they're retired, but they're aging differently. And when they come to me, they're not about guilt and blame. They are about moving forward. And I worked with a couple. The wife was a retired school librarian and she had bad arthritis and she wanted to sit in her recliner chair and watch TV all day. And the husband, he was in his early 70s, still working, biking, hiking, super, super physically active. And he wanted to have that active lifestyle. And so they came to me. It was extremely cordial. They were very respectful towards each other, and we got it done. And so, I see all different, never 2 days the same, all different stories.
yeah, again, because every family, no matter if they have kids, no kids, adult kids, every family is so unique and different and really, really needs the mediator to help them meet them where they're at and also help guide them on this journey. So, again, it can be as smooth as possible for everyone. Now, Nancy, as we wrap up, is there anything else that we've left out, maybe about just mediation in general or a success story you'd like to share with our listeners before we end?
Well, I do want to say that, I'm not perfect. I get called out. You're not a therapist. Don't ask me those questions. And I back off and I say, you're right. I'm not. But sometimes the need to be heard and to be listened to overcomes the need to be right. And so I allow people to vent. And when I hear them say the same thing more than twice, then I cut it off.
Mm,
But I think that's a really important thing for somebody who's considering mediation is it's a safe place to say in front of your spouse what you don't feel safe saying, not in front of a neutral third party.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand where that passion comes from of just wanting to help people, right? Because that's why you've been doing this for years, and that's why you have such a big passion, is because you want to help people.
Right.
So I love the work that you do. I love the energy that you bring to it. I think that came across already in this episode. So, of course, for those listeners who want to know more, especially those in the Nevada area, you can find out more about Nancy by going to her website, which the link is going to be in the show notes. Otherwise, like I mentioned, she is one of our amazing members of the Divorce Support Collective, so you can find out more information and get connected with her by going to thedivorcesupportcollective.com and looking under our professional members. And so thank you, Nancy, again, just for your time today and your wisdom and sharing those insights and stories with us. We very much appreciate it. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and definitely make sure to stay tuned for more episodes of Divorce Discussions.
Thank you, Angie. It was a pleasure being with you.
Thank you. You as well, Nancy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce Discussions podcast. If this was helpful, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next conversation. Visit thedivorcesupportcollective.com to explore resources and connect with our professionals. Until the next discussion, remember, you don't have to navigate this alone.